Changmino stands by the panoramic window of his office, looking out over the city at night. Below, the lights of cars crawl and neon signs flash. He has everything money can buy: a spacious apartment in the most prestigious neighborhood, expensive cars in the underground garage, respect and fear in certain circles. But in the vast living room behind him, a perfect, sterile silence reigns, a silence that oppresses in the evenings. He's almost 40, and this milestone anniversary is palpable in the air, like the approach of a thunderstorm. He doesn't want things. He wants tiny sneakers in the hallway, someone noisily getting ready for school in the mornings, someone waiting for him at home. But women flee. It's become a sad pattern. First, admiration, lavish courtship, expensive gifts. Then, cautious questions about his business. He never lies outright. He talks about logistics, about negotiations, about a family business with a complex structure. That usually suffices, for a while. But sooner or later, something happens. An overly wary look from his security guards, a phone conversation that's too loud in his presence, the overheard respectful boss from one of his subordinates. And then, first fear appears in the woman's eyes, then alienation, and finally, cold determination. They leave, quietly or scandalously, but they leave. He stopped being angry. He's simply tired. His business is a part of him, an extension of his will and character. To renounce it is to destroy oneself, a vicious circle. The door to the office opens without knocking. The only person who can afford it is Mr. Kim. He's 10 years older than Mino, with a face that rarely shows emotion, and an unfailingly impeccable politeness. He's been working for Mino for almost 15 years, ever since it was just a small office in a remote neighborhood. He's more than just an assistant. He's perhaps the only one who truly knows Mino. "Did you call me, boss?" "Just sit down, Kim-san." Mino moves away from the window and sinks into a leather chair. It's especially quiet today. Mr. Kim nods, taking his usual seat across from him. He waits. He knows how to wait better than anyone. "The woman, the one from the exhibition," Mino begins, waving his hand helplessly. "It's all over. She found out what I'm doing, or rather, she guessed. She left yesterday, even forgot her purse." "I'm sorry," Kim says dryly. His sympathy is never saccharine, which is something Mino appreciates. "It's not worth it." Another circle. "I want a family, Kim, not just a wife, a house, a child. But this, my world, it's repulsive. They're all afraid, or judge, and I can't change it." "You can't, and you shouldn't," Kim counters calmly. "It's the foundation of everything. Without it, you wouldn't exist." Mino's voice, for the first time in a long time, breaks with irritation. Almost despair. Wait for a miracle? Until 50? Until 60? Mr. Kim pauses, thinking. He looks past Mino, into space, considering his options. Silence fills the room again, but now it's work-like, focused. Mino almost regrets initiating this conversation. "There is one option," Kim finally says, his voice cautious, as if he's proposing a risky deal. "If it's the family that's important to you, not the marriage itself. If you want a child first and foremost, you don't need a woman for that." Mino frowns. "What are you talking about? Orphanages are full of children who dream of having parents," Kim says clearly, enunciating each word. "You could adopt a child, a boy, or a girl. You would give them everything, and you would have a family, without conditions, without fear, without a backstory." The idea hangs in the air. It's so simple, so obvious, and so alien to everything that surrounds Mino. His world is one of negotiations, power, control, complex schemes. But here there's a direct, almost childish simplicity. Want a child? Go and take the one who needs one most. Mino slowly leans back in his chair. His whole body seems to go numb. A thought, launched like a satellite, begins its quiet, inexorable work. A child, not hypothetical, not future, but real. Who is here right now? Who is waiting? His own son, or a daughter. He had always, in his deepest dreams, imagined a daughter. A little girl with big eyes, to whom he could give dresses and protect from the whole world. The image he had hidden somewhere deep suddenly bursts forth, bright and vivid. The silence in the office changes. It's no longer oppressive. It rings like a taut string. Mino sees before him not the walls of the office, but a different picture. Himself holding a little girl's hand, buying her ice cream, listening to her laughter. His heart beats unusually loudly. "A girl!" he suddenly says out loud, and his own voice sounds strange to him, full of a new confidence that even he himself doesn't understand. "I want to adopt a girl." He looks up at Kim, his entire being, a moment ago filled with tired apathy, now radiates an almost physical energy. "Right now, boss, maybe we should prepare the documents first. Learn the procedure," Kim begins, but Mino is already throwing his coat over his shoulders as he walks. "The paperwork will be done later." His voice brooks no argument. It carries that same tone that makes competitors tremble. But now there's no threat in it. There's only unwavering, feverish determination. This thought, it's like a flash. If I don't do it now, I'll change my mind. I'll start doubting. I feel it, Kim-san. Today will be a good day. Today I'll find her. The car! Let's go now. Mr. sighed. Kim, accustomed to his boss's impulsiveness in business matters, sees her in this context for the first time. He doesn't smile, but the corners of his eyes wrinkle, the closest he can get to showing approval. He nods, takes out his phone to give the driver instructions, and escorts Mino to the elevator. Jang Mino doesn't walk. He practically flies down the hallway. Every step echoes loudly. Daughter! Daughter, daughter, the word displaces everything. Fears, past failures, the complexities of his world. Only a clear, shining goal remains. He steps into the elevator, and the doors close, reflecting his unusually inspired face. He is absolutely certain this trip will change everything. The black SUV glides smoothly through the streets, leaving the business district behind. Mino sits in the back seat, but doesn't lean against the seat. He looks out the window, but sees no shops or people. His entire being is focused on the single point ahead, where they're headed. An unfamiliar excitement rages within him, mixed with iron confidence. Today, he thinks, and the thought sounds like an axiom. Today, everything will work out. He doesn't make plans, as he usually does. He simply believes. He believes with the same intensity with which he once believed in the success of his first risky venture. This feeling is familiar. It foretells certain victory. He mentally runs through the possible scenarios. He enters the room, and a small, dark-haired girl with bows runs up to him. No, she stands modestly to the side, and he notices her intelligent eyes first. Images follow one another, blurry and bright. He is absolutely certain it will be a girl. He always felt that he would have a daughter. Mr. Kim, sitting nearby, silently scrolls through something on his tablet, occasionally glancing at his boss. He sees Mino's fingers involuntarily tapping on his knee, his gaze focused somewhere in the distance. He doesn't ask unnecessary questions. He simply facilitates the process. The car turns onto a quieter street, then pulls through a gate. A large, but not gloomy, red brick building appears before them, with brightly colored shutters and a toy slide in the courtyard. It doesn't resemble the stereotypical image of an orphanage. There are no high walls or bars. Everything looks... They are greeted by the director, a friendly middle-aged woman. She says something about the rules, the children, the curriculum. Mino nods, occasionally glancing over her shoulder into the hallway where voices can be heard. He wants to see everything with his own eyes as soon as possible. Finally, they enter a spacious playroom, and the picture that appears before Mino completely disarms him for a second. There is no line of unfortunate orphans here. Here are ordinary children. Someone is racing cars across the carpet. Two girls are enthusiastically braiding a doll's hair. A group of boys are enthusiastically building something out of a huge Lego. Sunlight floods the room, dust motes dancing in its rays. The noise is so loud that you have to speak a little louder. Mino involuntarily loosens his grip on his tense shoulders. His preconceived notions melt away. His gaze glides over faces, searching for the one, his, a boy with mischievous eyes. A girl with pigtails whispering something to her friend, and then he notices her. She's sitting a little to the side, by the bookcase, not reading, just staring at the cover of the book in her hands. She's tall for her age, slender. Her skin is the color of dark chocolate, and her hair is braided into neat little pigtails, gathered at the crown of her head. And her profile, the features of her face. Mino suddenly feels a sharp throbbing in his temples. The air leaves his lungs in a single, oi, quiet whistle. All the noise of the game, laughter, shouts, the clatter of blocks, dims away, turning into a dull, distant rumble. As if from under thick water, he no longer sees the other children, only her. It's impossible. It's a dream, or a figment of an overheated imagination. But the longer he looks, the more a chilling bewilderment grips his body. The high cheekbones, the line of her brows, the shape of her lips, even the way she slightly purses her lips, deep in thought. Everything, absolutely everything screams of another person, of Diana. That same vulnerability in her lowered eyelashes, the same proud carriage of her head. The girl, a living, youthful version of the woman he once loved and lost many years ago. Time stands still for Mino. He stands rooted to the spot in the noisy room, feeling his palms grow cold and clammy, his forehead covered in a fine sheen of sweat. The director says something to him, turning and gesturing around the room, likely introducing the children. Mino sees her lips moving, but doesn't hear a single word. The sound doesn't reach his consciousness, blocked by the roaring waterfall of his own thoughts. Diana, how? Why here? Is this her daughter? But how then is she here? His logical chains break before they can form. The only thing that exists in reality now is the girl at the bookcase and the deafening, all-consuming shock that leaves the ground beneath his feet. He can hear his own heartbeat, loud, uneven, drowning out everything else. The director's lips are moving. Mr. Kim is whispering something in his ear, but it's just white noise, devoid of meaning. The world has narrowed to a tunnel, at the end of which sits this girl, a ghost girl, a girl incarnation. Feeling his gaze fixed on her, she slowly looks up, large, brown, with long lashes, and in them lies the same depth, the same mixture of reserve and curiosity that Diana once had. Their gazes meet. The girl doesn't smile. She tenses slightly, like a small, cautious animal, and looks away at the book in her hands. This gesture of complete vulnerability, yet without complaint, pierces Mino more accurately than any blade. Everything inside him screams that this is no accident. Mr. Chang? Are you okay? You look pale. The director's voice finally breaks through the cotton wool in his ears. Mino forces himself to blink. He takes a mechanical breath, trying to regain control. Yes, his voice was hoarse. He cleared his throat. It's okay, it's just, I saw her. That girl, by the bookcase. The director turns around. Ah, this is Alice. Alice, come here, please. Let me introduce you. The girl reluctantly moves away from her seat and approaches slowly. She doesn't make eye contact with the adults. Her gaze is downcast. She holds herself with dignity, but every line of her small body betrays the expectation of rejection, a habit of going unnoticed. Alice, this is Mr. Chang. He's come to meet the kids. Mino doesn't know what to say. All his prepared lines, all his polite questions, have vanished. He simply looks at her, his mind racing, comparing every feature to Kim, accustomed to everything, raises an eyebrow slightly. The director is speechless for a second. Mr. Chan, this is a very important step. You just arrived. Maybe you'll meet other children, talk to a psychologist, learn more about Alice. No. His voice is as hard as steel. There's no room for debate left in it. I'm sure. I want to give her a home. Today. All the necessary paperwork, checks, fees. My people will handle it immediately. Consider your institution's funding tripled from today. But I'm taking her now. He says this not as a request, but as a statement of fact. It's the tone of a man accustomed to having his conditions accepted. The director, confused, glances from him to the Sun. Silent Mr. Kim, who's already pulling out his phone to set the legal machinery in motion. She sees in Mino's eyes, not whim, but some incredible, fanatical conviction. Alice stands there, not fully understanding what's happening. She hears the words taking, home, and fear flickers in her eyes, then a faint, almost invisible spark of hope, which she immediately tries to extinguish, lest she get burned. 2 hours later, in the director's quiet office, Mino signed the preliminary documents. He didn't ask about Alice's character, her hobbies, or her past. He saw only her face, and that was enough. Mr. Kim quickly and efficiently handled all the formalities, making it clear that the rest would be completed as quickly as possible. Now they're sitting in the same black car. In the back seat, next to Mino, is Alice's small, hunched figure. She clutches a tattered bag containing her few belongings and stares out the window, afraid to move. Mino watches her profile, illuminated by the flickering lights of the city. The madness has receded slightly, giving way to cold analysis. He mentally formulates the reasons, justifying his reckless impulse to himself. The first reason, she is incredibly beautiful, just as he always imagined his daughter. Intelligent eyes, proud bearing, an inner light that has not faded. Despite the circumstances, he wanted to let this light blossom, but that was only half the truth, the one that lay on the surface. The second reason, the real one, lay deeper, and now it burned him from within. This girl was living proof. She was a walking hunch that needed to be tested immediately. If his shock wasn't a figment of his imagination, if the facial features weren't lying, then Alice could be the key to Diana, the key to his own past, to the truth that had been hidden from him. He had to know. He had to. And the only way to do that was to keep this hunch close, very close. He looks at Alice, and his gaze mingles a sincere, almost painful desire to care for the fragile creature sitting next to him with a cold, calculating need for answers. He doesn't yet know which of these feelings will be stronger. The car floated quietly along the evening streets, leaving behind neighborhoods that were becoming increasingly respectable. The silence inside was thick, almost tangible. Mino felt like every word he said would be like a stone dropped into the smooth surface of the water. He looked at Alice. She stood frozen by her window, as if trying to take up as little space as possible to blend into the interior. His mind was split in two. One part, new and inexperienced, screamed for comfort, for conversation, for the dispelling of this numbing fear. The other, familiar and commanding, insisted on action. He needed facts, he needed certainty, and he had no intention of waiting. He cleared his throat, and the girl flinched without turning her head. Alice, he began, trying to keep his voice soft, but there was still the familiar steel in it. Before we go home, we need to stop somewhere, just for a little while. She slowly turned her face towards him. There was a question in her eyes, but not a voice, just a quiet expectation of instructions. To the clinic, Mino added, feeling the wording sound awkward. We need to take general tests to check your health. I want to be sure everything is all right. He lied, and he lied clumsily. General tests? At an elite private clinic in the middle of the evening? But his brain, frantically searching for an excuse, couldn't come up with anything better. The main thing was to get the data. The main thing was to know. Alice looked at him for a few seconds. Something complex flashed in her gaze. Confusion, a hint of suspicion, but most of all, fear. Mino felt a twinge of something akin to shame, but he quickly suppressed it. This is necessary, he told himself, for her own good, to make everything clear. He nodded to the driver, who, without asking any questions, changed the route. The clinic was an austere glass and concrete building, more like a corporate headquarters than a medical facility. Inside, a quiet, expensive sterility reigned. No lines, no strange odors, only subdued lighting and the silent movement of staff in immaculate white coats. Alice pressed herself against Mino, her eyes widening in the cold splendor. They were shown into a private room, furnished like a comfortable office rather than a treatment room. The doctor, young and extremely polite, appeared almost immediately. Mino called him aside and, lowering his voice, gave a few clear instructions. The doctor merely nodded, without a hint of surprise. Apparently, they were accustomed to unusual requests from wealthy clients. Alice, this is Dr. Khan. He'll take a small sample. Just a tiny bit, Mino said, returning to the girl. His voice was trying to be encouraging again, but it came out formal. The doctor gave her a silent, professional smile. It'll be quick and almost painless, he said, taking out a sterile kit. Just a small prick in your finger. Alice obediently extended her hand. She clenched the other into a fist, but made no sound. Her gaze was fixed on her knees, as if she were mentally trying to tune out what was happening. When the thin lancet touched her skin, she only flinched slightly, but did not cry. This stoic submission, this ability to endure, touched Mino more deeply than any tears. He watched as a crimson drop of blood fell into a small test tube, and his own heart sank with a strange pain. The procedure took less than a minute. They stuck a brightly colored bandage on my finger. It was all over. So what now? Alice asked quietly, finally looking up at him. Now we'll wait a bit, Mino replied. The results will be ready soon. He didn't specify what. Results, exactly. They were led into a small, cozy waiting room with sofas, magazines, and an aquarium. Mino sat down in a chair, surrendering to a tense inactivity. Alice carefully settled on the edge of the sofa opposite him, stroking the bandage on her finger. The minute hand on the wall moved with agonizing slowness. Each tick echoed in Mino's temples. He furtively studied the girl, every detail. The shape of her ear, the way she bit her lip when she was lost in thought, the way she watched the fish in the aquarium with curiosity, but not delight, not childish delight, but quiet, contemplative attention. The longer he looked, the less doubt remained. It wasn't just a resemblance. It was something deep, something shared. He caught himself thinking he was no longer simply testing a hunch. He was waiting for confirmation. Confirmation that this quiet, beautiful girl sitting 3 meters away was his flesh and blood. That he hadn't simply acted impulsively, but intuitively found what was rightfully his. The excitement he was feeling was no longer pure passion or cold calculation. A tremor of something else had entered him. Something enormous and unfamiliar loomed over him, ready to collapse at any second along with the answer from the lab. He closed his eyes, trying to stop his fingers from trembling. The anticipation became unbearable. The door opened without a knock. Dr. Khan entered. He held not a printed form, but a thin clipboard. His face, previously impassively polite, now expressed cautious composure. He glanced from Mino to Alice, as if assessing the situation. Mr. Chang, he nodded slightly toward the corridor. The results are ready. If you'll excuse me. Mino stood up. His legs felt like jelly. He took a step toward the door, then turned to Alice. I'll be right back. Look at the fish, he said, his voice sounding distant, even to himself. They stepped out into a neutral white corridor. Dr. Khan lifted his tablet. There were no long texts or diagnoses on the screen, just a few lines, numbers, and diagrams. Mino's gaze immediately fell on the center line. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. The numbers glowed on the matte screen. At first, they meant nothing. Just ink on glass. Then their meaning crashed down on him with all its irreversible gravitational force. He heard a dull thud somewhere near his solar plexus. The air stopped flowing into his lungs. Are you sure? He breathed, though the question was absurd. Clinics like these don't make mistakes. They sell confidence. He peered at the numbers, trying to find a flaw, but found only confirmation of what his subconscious had known from the first second in the game room. 99.99%. This isn't similar. This is his daughter. Everything around him swam for a moment. Sounds became muffled. And then, like a flash, fragments of memory flared in his mind. Diana, their last weeks together. She became withdrawn. distant. She often cried for no reason and brushed off his questions, citing fatigue and stress at work. Then, her sudden, brutal breakup. "We come from different worlds, Mino. I have no future in your life." She said it with such icy determination that he, proud and hurt, didn't even try to hold back. He saw the pain in her eyes, but mistook it for the pain of separation. And this was pain on an entirely different scale. She knew even then. She carried his child in her womb and remained silent. Why? Pride? Fear? Was she afraid of his world? His affairs? Or did she not want to tie him down, seeing how immersed he was in his business? The puzzle fell into place with cruel, impeccable logic. She left, gave birth, and then the most incomprehensible thing happened. She left her, Alice, her daughter, theirs. The thought seared him with white-hot shame and rage. Rage not at Diana, that had dulled over the years, but at himself. How could he have failed to notice? Not sensed? He'd built empires, solved the most complex problems, and yet, most importantly, the simplest thing had passed him by, leaving a 10-year-old hole in his life, a hole that now sat in the next room, staring at the fish, unaware of anything. "Do you need a minute?" The doctor's voice brought him back to the sterile corridor. "No!" Mino almost automatically handed over the tablet. His face became a stony mask, beneath which a tsunami raged. "Thank you. Is confidentiality absolute?" "Absolute," the doctor nodded. "All data is encrypted. The original samples will be destroyed." Mino nodded to dismiss the doctor and was left alone for a few seconds in the white, brightly lit space. He breathed deeply and evenly, as if before an important fight, but there was no enemy. The enemy was the past, and he had just dealt it a crushing blow with the truth. He returned to the waiting room. Alice was sitting in the same position. She looked at him, and in her eyes, he read the silent question. "Am I okay? Am I healthy? Can I stay?" "You're more than healthy. You're mine," flashed through his head. "Everything's fine." His voice broke. He cleared his throat. "The tests are fine. Let's go home." They got back into the car. Now the night outside the window wasn't a promise, but a huge dark mirror, reflecting his thoughts. Alice, tired from the day's events, was gradually nodding off, leaning against the door. Mino looked at her sleeping profile. Now he saw not only Diana, he saw himself, the line of his jaw, the shape of his eyes, inherited from his mother, his blood, his genes, sleeping quietly nearby. The feeling was all-consuming, almost mystical. He was a father, a real, biological father, and this knowledge filled him with such strength and such helplessness at the same time. And then the crucial, agonizing question arose. Should I tell her? Right now, wake her up and say, "You know, I'm not just the man who took you in from the orphanage. I'm your father. By blood." But what good would that do to a frightened child who had just left the only world he knew? The word father would probably be an empty sound to her. It wouldn't bring joy, but a new wave of fear, misunderstanding, questions about his mother, about his past, questions he currently had no answers to. He imagined her reaction, rejection, distrust, tears. Her fragile trust, which had only just begun to form, could crumble to dust. But to remain silent, to hide the most fundamental truth, to build a relationship on a lie, however temporary? The car sped along the night highway. He was torn between the two abysses. To speak would be to risk everything. To remain silent would be to betray himself and her right to know. He felt the weight of this decision, greater than any bargain. It was the quiet, lonely agony of a new father who had everything he dreamed of, only to be faced with an impossible choice. He pinched the bridge of his nose with his fingers, trying to force some clarity out of himself. So far, there was none, only the roaring in his head and the quiet breathing of his daughter in the seat next to him. He decided to put it off, for a day, too, until she got used to it, until he himself came to his senses. The truth would not go away. It would wait. The car stopped at the entrance to a tall, austere building. The silence of the night was different here, expensive and guarded. Alice woke when the engine died. She rubbed her eyes and looked at the huge glass doors, beyond which lay a marble lobby with a chandelier. There was no delight in her gaze, only growing timidity. This world was too big and too pure. Mino got out, walked around the car, and opened the door for her. He extended his hand, but didn't take hers. He simply gestured for her to get out. He knew any touch right now might frighten her. "We're home," he said simply. They took the elevator to the top floor. The door opened not into the apartment, but into a private foyer. When Mino entered the code and swung open the massive door to the living space, Alice froze in the doorway. A huge, almost empty, minimalist living room opened up before her. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city at night, awash with lights. Everything was immaculate, expensive, and was lifeless, like a museum or a luxury hotel room. Alice stepped timidly onto the parquet floor, her worn sneakers feeling out of place. She stood there, clutching her pitiful bag, and Mino suddenly realized with painful clarity the full horror of her situation. This palace was an alien, cold space to her. He slowly approached her and dropped to one knee to be level with her. She flinched slightly, but didn't look away. "Alice, listen to me." His voice was quiet, but every word sounded weighty, like a vow. "This is your home now. You're safe here. No one will make you leave again. You'll have everything you want, everything you dream of. I promise you that." He didn't say, "I'll be your father." He couldn't yet utter the word, knowing the truth lay in his pocket like a hot stone. But his eyes, usually so impenetrable, now tried to convey the full seriousness of his intentions. He promised not as a mafioso, but as a man who had taken upon himself the highest responsibility. Alice nodded silently, her gag reflex noticeably triggered. She didn't believe the words. She believed the tone, and his tone held the same iron certainty as in the orphanage when he announced he was taking her. "Come on, I'll show you." He stood up. The tour was brief. Mino led her through the rooms, referring to them with dry, functional terms. Kitchen, study, guest room. Everything was sterile and uninhabited. Only in the study, on a massive table, sat a single personal item, an antique desk lamp. Alice followed it, almost on tiptoe, afraid to knock anything over. She didn't ask questions. She simply looked. Then they came to a long corridor with several closed doors. "And these are the bedrooms," Mino said. He opened the first one, a large room with a huge bed and the same panoramic view. "Empty." He opened the second one. Exactly the same. The third one. And then he stopped and looked at it. "You can choose anyone. Absolutely anyone. And tomorrow, we'll start changing it." Alice looked at him, puzzled. "Change it?" "Yes, so that it's yours, unlike the others. We'll remove everything you don't like. We'll buy new furniture, wallpaper, a carpet, whatever you can think of. Do you want it pink or blue? Or with stars on the ceiling?" He spoke, and for the first time in many years, he himself was imagining something concrete, not abstract, not interior, but a room for my daughter. For the first time, something other than fear flickered in Alice's eyes, a spark of lively curiosity, mixed with distrust. "Any?" she whispered. "Any, and we'll turn it into a princess's bedroom, or a pianist's, or an artist's, whatever you want." He approached the last door at the end of the corridor. It faced east, and he knew that was where the sun would shine first in the morning. The room was slightly smaller than the others, but cozier, with a bay window like a small tower. "This one, for example," he said, throwing the door open. "The sun shines here in the morning." Alice stepped carefully over the threshold. She approached the bay window and pressed her forehead to the cool glass, looking out at the dark city below. Then she turned, examining the empty walls. Images of the possible miracle she had just been promised were already flashing through her mind. She nodded almost silently. This one. It was her first independent decision in the new house. Small, but her own. Mino felt a strange surge of warmth in his chest. "Excellent. Then we'll start tomorrow. In the meantime, here's your room. The bathroom is over there. The towels are new. If you need anything, come out and call. I'll be in the office." He wanted to add, "Don't be afraid," but he didn't. He gave her space, and a promise that now, after the test results, meant 1,000 times more to him. He walked out, quietly closing the door, leaving her alone to take in the thought that this piece of a vast alien world was now hers. And he went into his office, facing the city at night, to finally let the trembling in his hands escape and think about how to build a bridge across the chasm between them, knowing what only he knew. The first night passed in absolute silence. Mino, accustomed to sleeping lightly and hearing every creak in the house, woke several times from the complete silence. He went out into the hallway and listened at her door. Not a sound. This obedience, devoid of childish spontaneity, cut him more sharply than any disobedience. "Wash and get dressed. Breakfast is in half an hour," he said, trying to sound neutral, and left, giving her space. A strange aroma permeated the kitchen. Mino's personal chef, who had received strict instructions from Mr. Kim that morning, had prepared no ordinary scrambled eggs or sandwich. On the table sat fluffy, golden pancakes, a plate of sliced seasonal fruit, syrup in an elegant decanter, and whipped cream. A simple, yet perfectly executed meal that a child would love. When Alice emerged, she was wearing the same clothes. She sat in the chair he showed her, her back straight. Her eyes slid over the abundance on the table but didn't light up. She waited. "Eat whatever you want," Mino said, pouring himself coffee. She carefully placed one pancake on her plate, skipping the fruit and cream. She broke off a tiny piece with her fork and brought it to her mouth. And then it happened. Her eyes, always so reserved, suddenly widened unnaturally. She froze with the piece of food in her mouth, not chewing. Then her eyelids began to flutter, her lips pressed together, and large, heavy tears began to roll down her cheeks, one after another. They fell straight onto the plate, unaccompanied by sobs or sobs, just a silent, bitter flow. Mino was stunned. Panic, sharp and helpless, squeezed his throat. "What is it? What's wrong? It's not tasty?" he said quickly. Alice shook her head, unable to utter a word. She tried to swallow the lump in her throat, wiping away the tears with the back of her hand, but they kept flowing. "Then what?" His voice softened. He pushed his cup away. "It's tasty," she finally managed, her voice full of shame for those tears. "It's just really tasty. I don't remember. Like this." She didn't finish, but he understood everything. It wasn't a whim. It was a reaction to kindness embodied in taste, to simple, home-cooked food, prepared with care. For her, it wasn't breakfast, but proof of the reality of what was happening, and it was so vivid that it broke down all her defenses. Mino stood up, went to the sink, poured a glass of water, and placed it in front of her. "Drink. It's okay to cry." He sat back down and began eating his pancake in silence, giving her time. He felt like a clumsy giant who had accidentally crushed something fragile. Gradually, the tears dried up. She cried to the end, drank the water, and even, under his calm, unobtrusive gaze, added a slice of watermelon and a drop of syrup to her plate. After breakfast, the tension eased a little. The sun was shining into the living room. Mino, who usually plunged straight into work, hesitated. "Would you like some tea?" he asked. "Or cocoa? There are cookies." She nodded, choosing tea. 10 minutes later, they were sitting in the living room on the huge sofa, a whole distance between them, and on the low table stood a tea set and a plate with elegant cookies of various shapes. The first minutes passed in silence, too. Then Mino, looking into his cup, asked, "Did you like the room? Is it cold at night?" "Fine," Alice answered quietly. "Do you read books? I saw you with a book yesterday." "Sometimes." She took a crescent-shaped cookie. "There was a small library at the orphanage. What kind do you like?" He was surprised by his own question. He had not been interested in children's books for about 25 years, Alice thought, carefully biting off the edge of the cookie. "About traveling, probably, or about animals, with lots of pictures." "So, today we'll buy books," Mino said simply, "with pictures. About traveling and animals." She looked at him, and for the first time there was no fear in her gaze, but only a slight, testing surprise. "Really? Really? What else? Maybe paints? Or a construction set?" She hesitated, then very quietly admitted, "One girl had a box of beads. She wove bracelets from it. It was beautiful." "Beads," Mino repeated, as if making a mental list. "Then there will be beads, too, in different colors." He didn't ask her about the past. He didn't ask about her mother. He asked questions about her quiet, modest desires, which could be summed up in a single shopping trip. And with each of his with each of her short, but already slightly more detailed remarks, the space between them on the sofa seemed to shrink a little, not physically, but in sensation. This was not a wild joy, but a cautious, sweet intimacy based on simple things: tea, cookies, and the promise of buying a box of beads. For Mino, this was a new, unfamiliar kind of negotiation, a negotiation of trust, where the currency was not threats or money, but attention to detail. And he, to his surprise, discovered that he wanted to win this negotiation more than any other deal in his life. After tea, Mino put everything aside. He called Mr. Kim and canceled his meetings for the day, saying only, "Family emergency." These words sounded strange and new to him. "So, our plan for today," he announced, returning to Alice's living room. "A big shopping spree. You need everything. Clothes, shoes, outerwear. Then we'll stop by the store for furniture and things for your room. And as I prove it, books and beads." Alice listened, her eyes wide. The entire list seemed overwhelming. At the orphanage, new things were handed out as needed, usually simple and the same for everyone. The idea of choosing something herself, especially in such quantities, was overwhelming. The first stop was a children's boutique in the most expensive shopping center. The store was empty, except for the staff. Mino had taken care of privacy in advance. The shelves were overflowing with bright, beautiful clothes. A smiling saleswoman tried to approach Alice, but she shied away behind Mino. "Let's do it ourselves," Mino stopped him dryly. He went to the rack with dresses and took down one, a soft blue one with embroidery on the collar. "How do you like this?" Alice touched the fabric with her fingertips, as if checking if it was real. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Try it on." He took her to the fitting room, leaving a whole stack of selected clothes by the door. Jeans, blouses, sweaters, skirts. After a while, the curtain opened slightly. Alice came out in a blue dress. It fit her perfectly, emphasizing her slenderness. She twirled uncertainly in front of the mirror, catching her reflection. And then it happened. The corners of her lips twitched and slowly crept upward. A small, shy, but completely sincere smile lit up her face. She saw in the mirror not just a girl in new clothes, but a beautiful girl, a princess, as Mino promised. He froze, watching this transformation. That smile was his first real victory. It was worth more than any successfully concluded deal. "We'll take it," he said, his voice slightly hoarse. And this yes." He pointed at the piles of clothes she hadn't even tried on yet. "Whatever you like." Over the next couple of hours, Alice gradually thawed. She began to cautiously offer opinions. "This red one is too bright. Can I have this sweater?" Mino merely nodded, and the consultants immediately set aside their choices. They bought several pairs of shoes, a warm jacket, and sneakers that glowed in the dark. Alice looked at this item with silent delight. Then there was a huge furniture store, more like a town of interiors. Here, Alice finally came out of her shell. The thought of her dream room outweighed all her fears. "I was thinking," she began, stopping in front of a canopy bed made of lightweight fabric. "What if the bed wasn't just a bed, but like a little house? Or like a rocking chair, but with a canopy?" "Yes. So you could hide." "We'll make a canopy," Mino immediately agreed, imagining his people looking for a canopy maker. "And the little house? We'll look at it. Maybe a bed with bookshelves at the headboard?" "Yes!" Her eyes lit up. "And a table by the window, in the bay window, so you can draw and look at the city. And the chair should swivel." "A swivel chair," he remembered. "And the color of the walls?" She paused, walking past the paint samples. "Not quite pink. Like a peach at dawn. Warm. And stars on the ceiling that glow in the dark. You can't see the real ceiling, only the stars." Mino listened to her, this sudden flood of fantasies, and felt his own cold, rational universe fill with these strange, wondrous details. The peach-colored dawn, the glowing stars, the swivel chair. He wasn't just fulfilling a promise. He was building a new world, her world, and a carpet, very fluffy to sit on, she continued, more boldly, and heavy curtains, so that the light doesn't wake you in the morning if you don't want to, and a large blackboard where you can draw with chalk and erase, and a globe, he added unexpectedly, remembering the travel books, so that you can see where which countries are. She looked at him, and a new wave of amazement flashed in her gaze. He wasn't just listening, he was participating, he was suggesting. "Yes," she said, and her voice sounded firmer. A large globe. They spent more than 2 hours in the store, compiling a list that grew by leaps and bounds. Mino wasn't thinking about cost. He was thinking about how tomorrow, pieces of their shared, newly imagined universe would begin to be delivered into this empty room. And for the first time in years, his future, not the month or year ahead in a business plan, but tomorrow, the day after, was envisioned not in numbers and contracts, but in the peach-colored walls and the glowing stars on the ceiling. That evening was different. The apartment, usually silent, was now filled with a quiet hum. Workers had begun preparing Alice's room. Somewhere in the closet they were putting away new clothes, and in the kitchen, the cook was preparing dinner. New, more childish recipes. But the main sound Mino heard was different. It was the sound of her voice. It became a little louder, more frequent. She asked questions. "When will the carpet be delivered? Can we paint the walls tomorrow?" Her intonations were no longer just timid. There was anticipation. They dined at the same table. Alice was no longer crying, but she ate with such concentrated pleasure that it spoke volumes. Then she showed him how she'd woven a simple beaded bracelet on wire bought right there at the craft store. Her fingers, so unsure that morning, now deftly handled the tiny beads. "Look!" She handed him a blue and silver strip. It worked. Mino took the bracelet. It was uneven. The beads were tight in some places, and there were gaps in others. But it was something made by her hands, something real. "Beautiful," he said, and it was true. He slipped it onto his wrist. It was too small even for his hand, and it almost broke, but Mino kept it. It was the first gift, even if it wasn't originally intended for him. He watched her carefully sort the beads by color into a new box, and felt a coil spring unwind within him. It wasn't just the satisfaction of a duty accomplished. It was a deep, quiet happiness from simple presence, from knowing that his child was sleeping in the next room, his blood, his daughter. The word father finally ceased to be an abstract concept. It was filled with the scent of new fabric, the taste of sweet tea, the sight of a child's focused face. He was happy, truly, like he hadn't been for many, many years. When Alice, tired from a busy day, finally retired to her still empty but already promised room, Mino was left alone in the study. The happiness hadn't faded, but a new, sober thought began to shadow it. It came when he saw Alice trying to braid her thin hair for the night, and she was having a hard time doing it. When she hesitated between 2 sets of pajamas. When at dinner, a drop of sauce fell on her new dress, and panic flashed in her eyes, not because she'd stained it, but because she didn't know how to properly remove it and was afraid of ruining it. She needed her mother, not some abstract woman in his life, but a mother. Someone who knew how to braid complex hair, how to explain menstruation. The thought made him uneasy. Someone he could talk to about his first crushes at school, his fears, the things that troubled a teenage girl, his love, his money, his desire to protect. None of that was enough. Her world needed feminine softness, understanding, experience. And he, Mino, with his world of negotiations and power, couldn't provide that. The next morning over coffee, he shared this thought with Mr. Kim. He listened, as usual, without interrupting. "You're right," Kim finally said. "A girl needs a stable female figure. But your situation, complicates the search. Regular dating, apps. The risk is too great that a woman will be interested not in you, but in your status, or, upon learning the truth, will be frightened. You need a way to weed out the unnecessary from the very beginning," Mino asked, sipping his coffee. Mr. Kim tilted his head slightly. "There's this unusual place. It's called Silent Dialogue. It's a cafe where they literally hold blind dates. People communicate in complete darkness. No age, no appearance, no social status, just voice, intelligence, values. At the end of the meeting, they turn on the lights. That's how they see the person they've already spent an hour talking with." The idea struck Mino as strange, almost absurd. Sitting in the dark with a stranger? But the more he thought about it, the more sense it made. In the darkness, his usual commanding posture wouldn't give him away, nor would his money or reputation. There would be only him, and his story, and his desire to find Alice's mother. It was the perfect filter. "Do they talk about important things?" Mino clarified. "According to reviews, yes. The organizers select people who are looking for serious relationships, not casual encounters. They talk about life, values, and family plans." Mino thought, looking at the door to the hallway, where Alice would soon wake up. He imagined her in a year, in 5 years. She would need support he couldn't provide alone. "Sign me up," he said firmly, "for the nearest possible time." The decision was made instantly, just like the one to go to the orphanage. But this time, it wasn't driven by impulsive hope, but by a cold, paternal calculation. The thought that Alice might grow up never knowing a mother's affection because he was putting it off for later terrified him more than any threat he'd made in the negotiations. He couldn't wait any longer. Quiet Dialogue turned out to be a discreet place with darkened windows. Inside, silence reigned, broken only by the manager's whisper. Mino filled out the form, stating with utmost honesty that he was seeking a serious, long-term relationship. There were no faces, no gestures, no appraising glances, only the scent of candles somewhere in the distance, and his own breath. Mino, accustomed to controlling every detail of his surroundings, felt vulnerable and strangely exposed at first. Then this feeling gave way to unexpected relief. Here, he was simply a man, not a boss, not someone to be feared, just a voice in the darkness. He heard the soft rustle of clothing opposite him, the creak of a chair. A presence appeared. "Hello?" said a female voice. It was calm, low, without artificial sweetness or obsequiousness. "Hello," Mino replied. His own voice sounded strange to him, without its usual armor. An awkward pause hung in the darkness, but it was different, not oppressive, but focused. Without visual contact, all my energy went into listening, intoning. "Unusual, isn't it?" Mino was the first to break the silence. "Yes." A slight, restrained smile could be heard in the stranger's voice. "At first it seems like it's a game. But then you realize it's more honest than usual. Why? Because you can't hide behind a smile or a pretty dress. All that remains is what's inside. Thoughts, words. It's frighteningly honest." Her words hit the mark. That's exactly what he wanted. Honesty. He took a deep breath. "Then let's start with the main thing. Why are you here?" he asked, using the direct approach he was accustomed to in business. The stranger didn't answer right away. He heard her sip from a glass of water. "I'm tired of superficiality," she said finally. Her voice acquired a light but firm tone. "From dates where everything is decided by a photo in an app or the make of a car. I want to find a person, not a picture. A person with whom I can build something real. A family. I think at my age, there's no time for games anymore." "How old are you?" he asked, probably breaking the rules. But it was important to him. 36. "And you?" "I'll be 40 soon," Mino answered. And strangely, in the darkness, this number sounded not like a sentence, but simply like a fact. "And I agree. I'm not interested in games either. I have a family, or rather, its basis." He paused deliberately, testing her reaction. In the darkness, there was only silence. "Tell me," she said softly, without judgment, without greedy curiosity. "I have a daughter. She is 10 years old. I became her guardian recently." He did not say adopted. and certainly did not say, "I am her biological father." That was too much for now. "It is a great responsibility," the stranger said. There was not a drop of false affection in her voice. There was seriousness, even respect. "What made you take such a step?" "The desire to have a family," Mino answered honestly. "I realized that I can give a child a home, care, a future, and she gives me meaning, more than I could have imagined." "Is she happy with you?" The question caught him off guard, with its simplicity and insight. "I'm trying. At first I was afraid. Now, she's starting to smile. She's asking me to buy a globe and beads for weaving." He didn't notice how his own voice softened, became warmer. In the darkness, it was especially clear. "You're a good father," the stranger said quietly. "It's palpable. Many men can't find the words to express themselves even to their own children. And you? Do you want children?" He turned the conversation to her. "Very much." Her answer was immediate and firm. "But not just to have them, to raise them, to be a mother, to pass on something beyond just genes, to love, to support, to be strict sometimes, to create a home where it's warm and safe. That seems to me the most important thing in life." His heart sank. Her words sounded like an echo of his own thoughts, spoken in a different, softer voice. Their desires, their goals, were surprisingly aligned. They had both moved beyond the stage of seeking distractions. Both were looking at the same point on the horizon, a solid, real family hearth. "Aren't you afraid," he asked, "that the man you meet already has a child, like my daughter?" "No," she answered without hesitation. "If he's a good father to his child, it means he's capable of responsibility and love. That's actually a plus. It proves he's not selfish." In the darkness, Mino exhaled slowly. He hadn't expected such clarity, such maturity. This conversation in complete darkness had been the most enlightening and honest thing he'd experienced in years. He even briefly recounted how Alice had cried over a delicious breakfast and how it had shaken him. The stranger listened, and in her silence, he heard understanding, not judgment. When the administrator quietly warned them that there were 5 minutes left until the end of the meeting, they both fell silent, surprised by how quickly the time had flown. The warning about the end of the date made Mino's stomach clench. The conversation had been surprisingly easy, but the most important thing remained unsaid. He felt he had to go further. If this was truly the man he could build a future with, she needed to know more. Not everything, but more. "You mentioned family, home," he began, his voice even more serious in the darkness. "I want to be completely honest with you. My daughter, Alice, I adopted her from an orphanage a few days ago." He paused, listening. No sigh, no movement, only attentive silence. "It was an impulsive move. I saw her and knew I couldn't leave without her. But there's one detail," he swallowed, choosing his words. "I didn't just choose a child. There's an old story connected to her, an old one, a personal one. I don't yet know all the circumstances, but I have a strong feeling that her appearance in my life is no accident. Perhaps fate is returning something very important to me, something I once lost without even knowing it." He said it, deliberately, vaguely, but enough to indicate the depth and complexity of the situation. He was testing. Would she be frightened by this mystery, this potential problem? "Do you love her?" the stranger asked after a short pause. Her question was again simple and precise. "Yes," Mino answered without the slightest hesitation. And it was the truth. Over these few days, something real had grown in his heart, something no longer dependent on the test results. "I love her, and I will do everything to make her life happy. But I understand that my love alone is not enough. She needs a complete family. You want to give her a mother," the stranger concluded softly. She wasn't asking, but stating, as if seeing right through him, even in the pitch darkness. "Yes," he admitted. This admission was his main goal on this date. "And I'm not just looking for a wife for myself. I'm looking for a mother for her, someone who can love her as their own. That's a huge ask of life, and of a stranger." Silence fell again on the other side of the table. But it wasn't empty. It was filled with thought. "It's very honest," she finally said. Her voice was thoughtful but not frightened, and very noble. "Not every man is capable of such directness and such paternal feelings from the very first days. You give the impression of a man who doesn't throw words to the wind." "I don't," Mino confirmed. And in that moment, he almost imagined how their life could have turned out as a threesome. Almost. "It's time," the administrator's voice said quietly somewhere in the distance. "The lights will be turned on now. Please get ready." Mino tensed involuntarily. A moment of pure uncertainty. Now the last barrier would disappear. He would see the woman whose voice and thoughts had touched him so unexpectedly deeply. He mentally prepared himself for any scenario. A pleasant but unfamiliar woman. Someone who would either disappoint his expectations, or conversely, exceed them. There was a slight click. The light didn't flare suddenly, but gradually grew. But to eyes accustomed to absolute darkness, it was blinding. Mino closed his eyes, blinked several times, shielding them with his hand. Gradually, the spots before his eyes began to dissipate. He lowered his hand and shifted his gaze to the opposite side of the table. At first, he saw only a silhouette, feminine shoulders, dark hair pulled back into an elegant yet simple updo. Then details became clearer. The line of a cheek, the arch of an eyebrow, a mole at the corner of her mouth. His heart stopped. It literally froze in his chest, and then lurched forward with such force that his ears began ringing. The blood drained from his face, leaving a feeling of icy numbness. He didn't breathe. His brain refused to process the information, insisting on a mistake, a hallucination. Diana was sitting in front of him, not a ghost, not a dream, real, alive, a little older, with subtle rays of light around her eyes that weren't there before. But it was her, the same woman whose face he'd seen in Alice's features, the one whose passing he'd thought was final all those years ago. Their gazes met. Her eyes, as dark and deep as he remembered, reflected the same shock, the same chilling horror of an incredible coincidence. Her hand, resting on the table, jerked involuntarily, knocking over a glass of water. The sound of the glass hitting the soft carpet was dull, muffled, but in the absolute silence of the room, it sounded like a gunshot. They were silent. A minute, an eternity. The sounds from outside, the voices of other couples beginning to laugh or talk, seemed to come from another dimension. The whole world narrowed to this table, to two pairs of eyes that couldn't tear themselves away from each other, seeing in them a reflection. They hadn't simply found each other on a date. They were already forever connected by the 10-year-old girl who was now waiting for him at home. The glass rolled across the carpet, leaving a wet trail behind it. This insignificant, everyday sound finally broke the paralysis. Diana jumped up as if scalded, her chair falling backward with a crash. She recoiled, pressing her palms to her mouth, her eyes, full of horror and incomprehension, fixed on Mino. And suddenly, those eyes filled with water, not just tears, a flood that poured silently, crushingly, washing away all her adult restraint. Her whole body trembled, and her cry burst forth, quiet, guttural, filled with such pain and shame that Mino, still rooted to the spot, felt something clench inside him. "No," she breathed through her fingers. "No. This can't be Mino." His name, spoken by her after so many years, sounded like the flick of a switch. He rose slowly, his entire world now swinging on the axis of this table. "Diana," he said. His voice was dull, devoid of intonation. "You." That was all he could say. All the questions, all the years, all the pain and anger, it all tangled into one ball, now pressing against his throat. He saw her tears, saw the absolute despair on her face, and his first instinct was rage. Rage for the years stolen from him, for his daughter, raised in an orphanage. But his rage clashed with her sobs, with her obvious, unimaginable suffering. You said, a girl, Alice." Diana tried to speak, but her words were drowned out by sobs. She took a step back, stumbling, as if she wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't obey her. "Yes," his voice grew sharp. "Alice, 10 years old, from an orphanage. You know that name, don't you?" He didn't ask. He accused. Every word was like a blow. Diana shook her head, but it wasn't denial. It was a gesture of utter helplessness. How did you find her?" she whispered. "I wasn't looking," Mino answered coldly. He left the table, approaching her, and she didn't retreat, frozen before him as if doomed. "I came for a daughter." "Any daughter. I wanted—" He clenched his fists, trying to regain control of his voice. "I saw her, and in her was your face, your gaze, your everything. I took her because I couldn't help but take her, and because I needed to know." He pulled a folded sheet of paper from his inside jacket pocket. Not the original test, but a copy, which he carried with him as a talisman or as a self-indictment. With a sharp movement, he unfolded it and handed it to her. "To know this." Diana took the paper with trembling hands. Her gaze slid over the lines, stopping at the fateful numbers, 99.99%. A quiet, stifled groan was heard. The paper fell from her fingers and slowly fell to the floor. She looked at Mino, and something beyond shock was visible in her eyes, a stunning, chilling understanding. "You didn't know?" she squeezed out. "You really didn't know when you took her?" "Know what?" His voice rose to a shout, and the neighboring tables finally fell silent, staring at them. "That you were pregnant? That you gave birth to my daughter and threw her away like something worthless? No, Diana, I didn't know. You took care of that." His words, loud and venomous, finally brought her out of her stupor. Her tears suddenly dried up. Her face turned ashen gray, but hard. "I didn't throw her away," she whispered with such force that he took a step back. I couldn't, Mino. You know what you were like then. All about your business, your rules. You were building your empire, and I was just a girl. I was scared. Scared of everything. Your world, your rage, the fact that our daughter would become your vulnerability, or worse, get used to it all. I thought I was saving her by giving her up at the maternity hospital. I thought I was giving her a chance at a normal life, with normal people, not with you. Every word she said was spot on. He remembered himself then, young, tough, obsessed. The world he considered the only possible one was truly a fortress, into which he allowed no one truly close, not even her. And then, her voice trembled again, then I went mad with grief. I came back a week later, but she had already been transferred to the system. I tried to search, but everything was anonymous. I thought I had lost her forever. And this was my punishment. Every day, she covered her face with her hands again, but now it wasn't sobbing, but a quiet, endless agony. Mino looked at her. His anger, so bright a second ago, began to crack at the seams, drowned by something else. He saw before him not a treacherous woman running away from her problems, but a woman like himself, a victim of her own stupidity, pride, and fear. And he saw a mother who had lived for 10 years in the hell of her own choosing. He silently picked up the paper from the floor and stuffed it back into his pocket. Then he lifted her chair and gestured for her to sit. She sat down hesitantly, unable to look at him. I have her, Mino said quietly. He spoke no longer as an accuser, but as a father stating a fact. She's in my house. She's afraid of shadows, cries when she eats a delicious breakfast, and dreams of a room with a canopy and stars shining on the ceiling. Her name is Alice. At the sound of his name, Diana shuddered as if struck by an electric shock. She raised her tear-stained face to him. Her eyes now burned with only one emotion, a greedy, insane, maternal hope mingled with such fear that he could physically feel it. She tried to pull herself together, straightening her shoulders. Her voice was hoarse, but firm. I know I have no right to do this. I know this is impudence that goes beyond all bounds. But, Mino, please, let me see her. At least once. At least, just see her. I won't demand anything. I need to know that she's okay. That she's alive. That she's smiling, she begged. Not like the proud Diana of his past, but like a broken woman begging for alms. A glimpse of her own child. And there was no guile in this request. Only the naked, inverted truth. Mino considered this. His mind screamed of danger, of potential pain for Alice, of confusion. But his heart saw something else. It saw Alice secretly looking at photographs of other children with their mothers. It heard her timid question from yesterday, and where is my mother? And it saw the face of this woman before him, her mother's face, tormented by decades of remorse. He hadn't forgiven her. Not yet. Perhaps he never would completely, but he was thinking about Alice. She doesn't know who I am yet, he said quietly. I didn't tell her I was her father by blood. I was afraid to scare her. Now she'll have to know everything at once, and it will be a shock. I'll do whatever you say, Diana responded instantly. I'll just be a guest, an observer. You're in charge. Always. The last two words sounded like a vow. They both understood that the balance of power had changed forever. He was the father, taking responsibility. She was the supplicant. Mino looked at her with a long, heavy gaze, weighing the risks. Then he nodded, once, sharply. Okay, let's go, now. But remember, one wrong move, one ill-timed tear, and you'll never see her again. He wasn't threatening. He was making a statement. She nodded, quickly wiping her face, trying to compose herself. She was shaking, but there was a purposefulness in her movements that hadn't been there a moment ago. The drive to his house was complete silence. Diana sat clutching her seatbelt, her gaze glued to the flickering lights outside the window, but she saw nothing. Mino remained silent, running through possible scenarios in his head. It was already late when they entered the apartment. Only one floor lamp was on in the living room. Alice, contrary to her schedule, was awake. She was sitting on the floor in her pajamas, nonsense, among a spread of new animal books, quietly doodling in a notebook. At the sound of footsteps, she looked up. She saw Mino, and her face lit up with a familiar, yet still cautious smile. Then her gaze fell on the woman behind him. The smile froze. Alice froze, the pencil falling from her fingers. She looked at Diana, and there was no fear in her eyes. There was something else, a deep, intuitive recognition, mixed with utter bewilderment. She saw her reflection in the matured, pain-contorted face. Mino walked over and slowly knelt down in front of her, shielding her from Diana with his body. Alice, he began, his voice as gentle as it could be. This is a very important conversation. You remember how I said everyone has a story? Ours turned out to be amazing. He took her small hand in his and began to tell her, in simple words, about how, long ago, he had loved a woman, that they had broken up, that he didn't know it, but they had a daughter, that her mother, frightened, made a very bitter mistake, and that the greatest success of his life happened when he walked into an orphanage and saw the most beautiful girl in the world, who turned out to be his own daughter. Alice listened, her eyes never leaving his. Her face was serious, mature. Then her gaze slowly moved to Diana, who stood a few steps away, holding her breath, crying again, but this time silently. "Is this my mother?" Alice asked quietly. "Yes," Mino breathed out. "This is your mother. Her name is Diana. She's been looking for you all this time, and today we met by chance, and now she's here." He stepped aside, giving her space. Diana, unable to stand any longer, slowly sank to her knees at a distance. "Hello, Alice," she whispered, her voice breaking on the very first note. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Alice looked at the crying woman. Then she looked at Mino. A struggle raged in her eyes. Resentment, pain, questions, and that same deep, innate attraction that had once made her reach for a book in the orphanage when she saw him. She stood up. She took a small step forward. Then another. She approached Diana, who froze, afraid to move. Alice silently reached out and very carefully, with her fingertips, touched her wet cheek. She touched her hair. Still silently, searchingly, Diana closed her eyes, unable to hold back fresh sobs at this touch. "You're very beautiful," Alice finally said in her quiet voice. "And we have the same eyes." This simple, childish conclusion broke all the dams. Diana cried out softly and awkwardly, afraid of frightening her, hugged her. Alice froze at first, then her arms slowly hugged her mother back. She didn't cry. She simply held on, as if testing the reality of this sensation. Mino watched this scene from a distance. A sea of conflicting emotions raged in his chest: pain, jealousy, anxiety, but also a strange, all-encompassing relief. He saw how a part of the emptiness in his daughter, one he hadn't even suspected, began to fill. He walked over and placed his hand on Alice's head, stroking her hair. She looked up at him, and in her eyes, he saw not confusion, but a new, complex fullness. "So," Alice said slowly, not letting go of Diana, "I have both a mom and a dad now? Real ones?" "Yes," Mino said, his voice firm. "Real ones. Both of us. We'll do everything to make you happy. Everything." He looked at Diana over his daughter's head. Their gazes met. His was still wary. Hers was filled with endless gratitude and resignation. They weren't a family in that moment. Too many wounds, too many questions. But in that moment, in the quiet light of the floor lamp, with their daughter at the center, they became its foundation, a framework on which to begin building something new. Not perfect, but their own. For the first time in many years, the huge, cold apartment was filled not with the silence of loneliness, but with the silence of three people who had found each other through years, mistakes, and incredible, irrational chance. A family, against all odds, reunited.